They laughed when I said I was leaving. Not the kind of laugh you can laugh off later. Not surprise. Not disbelief. The kind of laughter that tells you they've already decided who you are. My mother didn't even look at me. She was cutting her chicken, slow and careful, like nothing important was happening. "You're not serious," she said. My sister smirked. "Where exactly are you going?" My brother didn't bother hiding it. "You'll be back in a month." No one asked why. No one asked how. I sat there, my hands folded under the table, feeling small. Familiar. Like I had said something embarrassing instead of something final. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I just nodded. Back then, I didn't know that one day they would be standing outside my door. My name is Emily. I was 28 years old, and I lived in a quiet town in Ohio where nothing ever really changed, except the way people talked about you behind your back. From the outside, our house looked like the kind people trusted. White siding. A porch swing that hadn't moved in years. A flag by the door that my father insisted on replacing every summer. Neighbors waved. Mail arrived on time. Everything looked solid. Inside, I learned how fragile silence could be. I lived with my parents, my older sister, and my younger brother. Technically, I was an adult. In reality, I was a reminder of something that hadn't worked out. I slept in my childhood bedroom. Same narrow bed. Same dresser with one loose handle. Same crack in the ceiling that I used to stare at when I was 16, wondering when my real life would start. I told myself it was temporary. They told me it was generous of them to let me stay. I worked part-time at a daycare about 20 minutes away. Nothing impressive. Minimum wage. No benefits. I spent my days kneeling on cold floors, wiping tears, tying shoelaces, singing the same songs over and over again. I was good at it. The kids reached for me when they were scared. They fell asleep on my shoulder during nap time. They remembered my name. At home, my name was usually followed by a sigh. Dinner was the hardest part of the day. We ate together almost every evening, sitting at the same table we'd had since I was a kid. My parents believed in routine. Structure. Stability. Conversation always followed the same pattern. My father talked about work. My brother talked about money. My sister talked about plans. And then there was me. "So," my mother would say, pretending to sound casual, "are you still at that daycare?" Still. Like it was a phase I refused to grow out of. "Yes," I'd answer. "And how long do you plan to do that?" I never knew how to respond to that question. There was no answer that wouldn't disappoint them. I paid what I could. $300 a month. Sometimes more if I picked up extra shifts. I bought my own groceries when my paycheck allowed it. I cleaned. I stayed quiet. It was never enough. My sister once laughed and said, "You're lucky Mom and Dad are so patient." Patient. Like I was a delay. Like I was something they were waiting to move past. They never yelled at me. That would have been easier. Yelling leaves bruises you can point to. They joked. They joked about how I took my time. About how I was sensitive. About how not everyone was meant for ambition. Every joke landed softly. And stayed. I learned how to shrink. I learned how to make myself smaller at the table. How to speak less. How to nod when they talked about real jobs and real responsibilities. At night, I lay in bed listening to the house settle. Pipes creaking. The television downstairs. My parents' voices muffled through the walls. I felt like I was waiting for permission to exist. The idea of leaving didn't come from courage. It came from exhaustion. From the way my chest felt tight every morning before work. From the way I avoided mirrors. From the way my own name sounded unfamiliar when someone said it kindly. One evening, after another dinner where my life was discussed like an unfinished project, I said it. Not loudly. Not dramatically. "I'm moving." For half a second, no one reacted. Then my sister laughed. My brother shook his head. My mother didn't look up. "You're not serious," she said. I stared at my plate. "I am." "Where?" my sister asked. I didn't answer. Because if I said it out loud, they would tear it apart. The plan. The place. The idea of me surviving without them. My brother leaned back in his chair. "You don't have the money," he said. My father finally looked at me. His expression wasn't angry. It was tired. "Be realistic, Emily." Realistic. That word followed me for years. I stood up, carried my plate to the sink, and washed it slowly. My hands were shaking, but no one noticed. Or maybe they did and chose not to. That night, I packed quietly. Not everything. Just what fit into one suitcase. Clothes. Documents. A pair of shoes I trusted. $200 I had saved by skipping lunches and lying about hours. My phone screen was cracked. The battery barely held a charge. I didn't fix it. It felt symbolic somehow. When I zipped the suitcase, the sound felt louder than it should have. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time. Listening. No one came to my door. No one asked where I was going. In the morning, my mother stood in the kitchen holding her coffee mug. "So," she said, "when you come back, we'll talk about a better plan." I nodded. I walked out with my suitcase. The door closed behind me. And for the first time in my life, no one told me I was making a mistake that I left before sunrise. Not because I wanted a dramatic goodbye. Because I didn't want to give myself a reason to turn back. The bus station smelled like burned coffee and disinfectant. The lights were too bright for that hour, buzzing softly above rows of plastic seats. People sat with their bags between their knees, guarding them like secrets. No one looked at anyone else for too long. I bought the ticket with shaking hands. One way. The screen asked me to confirm. I stared at it for a second longer than necessary, as if it might ask me one last question. It didn't. I had $200 in my wallet. 3 20s. A few smaller bills folded so many times they felt soft. I counted them twice. Then once more, just to be sure nothing had disappeared. My phone was at 12%. The crack across the screen split my reflection in half. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. If they didn't know, they couldn't follow. If they couldn't follow, I wouldn't have to explain myself. The bus pulled in with a long sigh, like it was already tired of the road ahead. I climbed the steps, handed over my ticket, and chose a seat near the back. The vinyl was cold through my jeans. As the bus started moving, my town slid past the window. The grocery store where my mother waved to people she barely liked. The daycare where kids hugged my legs at the end of the day. The street where my sister's house stood, neat and finished, like a sentence with a period. No one waved goodbye. I pressed my forehead to the glass and watched everything become smaller. I expected to feel brave. I felt hollow. The farther we went, the quieter it got inside my head. Fear didn't scream. It sat beside me, patient, like it knew I couldn't escape it anyway. What if they were right? What if I ran out of money? What if I came back? I didn't let myself finish that thought. The ride took hours. The landscape changed slowly. Cornfields gave way to highways. Highways to exits I didn't recognize. I slept in short bursts, waking up every time the bus stopped, heart racing, convinced it was my turn to get off. When it finally was, my legs felt unsteady. The city was bigger than I expected. Louder. Faster. People moved like they had somewhere important to be. No one noticed me standing there with my suitcase and my uncertainty. I had booked a room online. 3 nights. Cash only. No refunds. The place was above a laundromat. The stairs smelled like detergent and old water. The room was small. 1 bed. 1 lamp that flickered when I turned it on. A window that faced a brick wall. I sat on the bed and checked my phone. 9%. No messages. No missed calls. I didn't know whether to feel relieved or hurt. That night, I lay awake listening to the hum of machines below me. The bed was too soft in the middle, like it had given up trying to stay firm. I stared at the ceiling and counted breaths. I had never been this alone. In the morning, I went out looking for work. I walked until my feet hurt. Past coffee shops with handwritten menus. Past offices with glass doors and people in clean clothes tapping on phones. I stepped into places that had "now hiring" signs taped to the window. I smiled. I asked. I filled out forms. Some people barely looked at me. Some said they'd call. They never asked where I came from. They didn't need to. My hands said enough. By the third day, my money felt lighter. I bought the cheapest groceries I could find. Bread. Peanut butter. Instant noodles. I ate standing up, leaning against the counter, because sitting felt like staying too long. When my phone finally died, I didn't charge it right away. The silence felt honest. On the fourth day, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. "Can you start tonight?" the voice asked. It was a diner on the edge of the city. Overnight shifts. Cleaning. Closing. Yes, I said too quickly. I didn't ask about pay. I didn't ask about hours. I just said yes. The work was harder than I expected. Grease under my nails. Floors that never quite came clean. My back aching by the end of the shift. The manager spoke fast and didn't smile. But at the end of the night, she handed me an envelope. Cash. I went into the bathroom and locked the door. I counted it twice. It wasn't much. But it was mine. I leaned against the sink and felt something loosen in my chest. Not happiness. Not relief. Permission. I found a cheaper place to stay. A room in an apartment shared with two women who barely spoke to me. The walls were thin. The heating worked when it wanted to. The rent was due every Friday. I took every shift I could get. Diner at night. Warehouse work in the early morning. Occasional babysitting when someone canceled last minute. I learned how to stay awake. How to drink coffee slowly so it lasted longer. How to sleep sitting up on buses. Some nights, exhaustion made me reckless. I'd imagine calling home. Just to hear a voice. Just to prove I still existed to someone who knew my name without asking. But I never did. I didn't want to hear "I told you so." I didn't want to hear relief. There were moments I almost quit. Standing in line at the grocery store, counting coins, while the woman behind me sighed loudly. Watching couples my age plan weekends while I planned meals down to the dollar. Crying silently in the shower because the water drowned out the sound. Once, after a 16-hour day, I sat on the floor of my room and didn't move for a long time. I thought about the porch swing. The dinner table. The jokes. It would have been easy to go back. No one would have blamed me. That scared me more than staying. So I stayed. I learned the city's rhythm. Which buses ran late. Which streets felt safer after dark. Which corners smelled like bread in the morning. I learned how little I actually needed. A clean shirt. Enough food. A door that locked. Weeks passed. Then months. The work didn't get easier, but I did. I stopped flinching when my phone rang. I stopped apologizing for taking up space. One evening, counting tips at the diner, I realized something that made my hands go still. No one here knew who I used to be. No one had expectations of me. I wasn't the disappointment. I wasn't the joke. I was just Emily. And for the first time, that felt like enough. Winter came quietly. Not with snow at first, but with the kind of cold that settles into your bones before you realize it's there. The kind that makes you wake up already tired. By then, I had been in the city for a little over 5 months. Long enough to stop feeling like a visitor. Not long enough to feel safe. The apartment I shared with 2 other women was old and stubborn. The heat worked on its own schedule. Some nights, it roared like it was trying to prove something. Other nights, it barely breathed. I slept in layers. Socks. Hoodie. Sometimes my jacket. I learned to wake up before my alarm because my body expected exhaustion. My days blurred together. Diner shifts at night. Warehouse shifts early in the morning. Babysitting on weekends when someone canceled their plans and needed a favor fast. My hands were always dry. My back always sore. There was a constant smell of bleach on my clothes no matter how many times I washed them. I stopped checking the calendar. I measured time in pay envelopes and grocery receipts. The warehouse was the worst in winter. Concrete floors. Drafts that slipped in through gaps no one bothered to fix. The supervisor didn't yell. He just watched, clipboard in hand, like people were numbers that moved slower when they were tired. Sometimes I'd catch my reflection in the bathroom mirror during a break. My face looked sharper. Older. Not worse. Just different. I had lost weight without trying. My eyes looked more awake, even when my body wasn't. There was a steadiness there that surprised me. Still, there were nights I almost broke. Once, I missed the last bus home. I stood at the stop with my hands shoved into my pockets, watching my breath fog the air. My phone battery was low. The street was quiet in a way that felt unsafe. I considered calling one of my roommates. Then I remembered I didn't know their numbers. I walked. 40 minutes in the dark, past closed stores and flickering streetlights. My feet were numb by the time I reached the apartment. I stood in the shower afterward until the water ran cold, just to feel something. Another time, my paycheck was short. Not by much. $28. But it might as well have been $100. I stared at the envelope at the kitchen table, counting again and again, hoping I'd misread something. I hadn't. I skipped meals that week. Told myself I wasn't hungry anyway. Drank coffee instead of eating. The hunger came in waves. Sharp at first. Then dull. It was easier than admitting I was scared. I didn't tell anyone. There was no one to tell. The loneliness surprised me more than the work. Not the dramatic kind. The quiet kind. The kind where no one asks how your day was. Where no one notices if you come home late. Where your name isn't spoken for days unless you say it first. At the diner, customers learned my face but not my story. At the warehouse, people nodded but never lingered. My roommates existed around me like furniture. At night, I sometimes talked out loud. Just to hear a voice. I told myself it was temporary. Everything was temporary. Then something small happened. I got sick. Nothing serious. A fever. A cough that settled in my chest. But I couldn't afford to miss shifts. I wrapped myself in layers and went anyway. Halfway through a night at the diner, my hand started shaking. The manager noticed. "You don't look good," she said, not unkindly. "Sit." I sat. She brought me a mug of soup from the back. Didn't charge me. Didn't make a big deal of it. "Don't make a habit of this," she said. "But don't pass out on my floor either." I nodded, throat tight. I drank the soup slowly. It tasted like more than food. It tasted like being seen. That night, I went home and slept for 10 hours straight. When I woke up, my phone buzzed. A message from my mother. Just one line. "Are you coming back for Christmas?" I stared at the screen for a long time. I didn't answer. Not because I was angry. Because I didn't know who I would be if I went back. Christmas came and went. I worked double shifts. The city felt emptier but not kinder. People tipped less. Everyone was in a hurry. I watched decorations go up and come down without ever touching one. In January, my warehouse contract ended. No warning. No apology. I stood outside the building holding my coat closed, feeling the wind cut through me. For a moment, panic rose so fast it made me dizzy. I sat on the curb and counted my breaths. Then I stood up. I updated my resume at the public library. Used a computer with a sticky keyboard and a time limit. Applied to places I would have been too scared to try months ago. Offices. Clinics. Schools. I didn't lie. I didn't exaggerate. I just didn't apologize anymore. 2 weeks later, I got a call. A community center was looking for a full-time assistant. Front desk. Scheduling. Some childcare support. Benefits after 90 days. The pay wasn't amazing. But it was steady. My first day, I wore my best shirt and shoes that pinched my feet. I smiled at people who didn't know how close I had come to disappearing. The desk was clean. The chair didn't wobble. There was a name tag waiting for me. Emily. Seeing it there made my throat tighten. I still worked the diner nights for a while. I didn't trust stability yet. I kept backups. Just in case. But slowly, things shifted. I slept at night. I ate without counting. I bought groceries without panic. I moved into a smaller room closer to work. It had a window that let in actual sunlight. I bought a plant and kept it alive. That felt important. I started to stand differently. Straighter. I stopped checking my phone hoping for messages that never came. One evening, walking home from work, I realized something that stopped me mid-step. I wasn't surviving anymore. I was here. And no one was laughing. Stability doesn't arrive the way movies promise. It doesn't knock. It doesn't announce itself. It slips in quietly and waits to see if you'll chase it away. By the time spring came, I had stopped counting how long I'd been gone. I marked time differently now. Rent paid on time. Groceries bought without panic. Mornings that didn't start with dread sitting on my chest. The community center became my anchor. Every weekday, I unlocked the front door at 8:45 a.m. The same metal key. The same resistance in the lock. I liked that predictability more than I was willing to admit. Inside, the building smelled faintly of cleaning solution and old books. Children's drawings lined the walls. Crayon suns. Uneven stick figures. Names written with too much pressure. People learned my face. Morning, Emily. Thanks, Emily. Can you help me, Emily? No one asked what I used to do. No one needed to know. I scheduled rooms. Answered phones. Helped parents fill out forms they didn't understand. Occasionally covered for childcare when someone was late. It wasn't glamorous. But it was steady. And steady felt like oxygen. After 90 days, they added benefits. Health insurance. I stared at the email for a long time before I believed it was real. I booked a doctor's appointment just because I could. Sitting in the waiting room, flipping through outdated magazines, I felt something close to disbelief. Like I had tricked the system by simply staying long enough. My new place was small but mine. A studio apartment on the third floor of an old building that smelled like dust and coffee. The floors creaked when I walked across them. The radiator hissed like it had opinions. The window faced an alley, but the light was real. I bought a second-hand couch. It sagged in the middle. I didn't care. The first night there, I sat on the floor with my back against the wall and ate takeout from the container. No one commented on my spending. No one asked if I should be saving instead. The silence felt earned. I stopped overworking myself. Not all at once. Not confidently. I dropped the diner's shifts one by one. Told myself I was allowed to rest. That it wasn't laziness. That it was maintenance. Rest felt suspicious at first. I waited for something bad to happen. For a call. A bill. A mistake that would send everything crashing down. It didn't. Weeks passed. Then more. I bought new shoes because my old ones hurt my feet. I didn't justify it. I just did it. I started cooking real meals. Not just survival food. Vegetables. Spices. Things that took time. I learned what I liked when no one was watching. Music played softly while I cleaned. Windows open when the weather allowed. Books borrowed from the library, returned on time. I wasn't happy all the time. But I was calm. That was new. My family stayed quiet. No calls. No apologies. No concern. Sometimes, my mother would send a short message. Hope you're okay. Just checking in. They never asked how I was living. Never asked if I needed anything. And slowly, I realized something uncomfortable. They assumed I still did. That assumption stopped hurting as much. One evening, my sister posted photos online. A birthday dinner. Smiling faces. The same dining table. The same jokes I could almost hear through the screen. I looked at the pictures longer than I meant to. Then I closed the app. I didn't feel jealous. I felt distant. Like watching a show I used to be in. The biggest change wasn't my job or my apartment. It was my voice. At work, when someone interrupted me, I finished my sentence anyway. When a parent spoke down to me, I didn't shrink. I stayed polite. Firm. Present. When my supervisor asked if I could take on more responsibility, I didn't laugh it off. I said yes. And then I did it. I started trusting myself. That trust changed how I walked. How I stood in lines. How I met people's eyes. One afternoon, while sorting paperwork, a volunteer asked casually, "So, do you live around here?" "Yes," I said. No explanation. No apology. Just yes. The word settled into me. I began to understand something I had never been taught. Stability isn't loud. It doesn't prove itself. It just holds. There were still moments. Quiet ones. When doubt crept in. Late at night, lying in bed, I'd remember my mother's voice. My brother's certainty. My sister's smile. "You'll be back in a month." I wondered if they remembered saying it. I wondered if they noticed I hadn't come back. Sometimes, I thought about calling. Not to explain. Just to speak. To see if the distance had softened anything. But every time I imagined the conversation, I felt myself closing again. I liked who I was becoming. I didn't want to hand her over so easily. One night, as I was getting ready for bed, I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror. Same face. Same eyes. Different posture. I stood there longer than necessary, studying the woman who had survived herself. I wasn't strong in the way people post about. I was consistent. I showed up. I paid my bills. I kept my promises, especially the ones I made to myself. That felt dangerous to admit. Because it meant I had something to lose. Then, on an ordinary Tuesday, my phone buzzed while I was eating dinner. A message from my father. Not long. Not emotional. "Can we talk?" I stared at it until the screen dimmed. My heart didn't race. That surprised me most of all. I put the phone face down on the table and finished my meal. The food was still warm. And for the first time, I realized something quietly, without drama. They no longer decided when I was available. And whatever came next, I would be the one to choose that I didn't answer my father's message that night. Not because I didn't see it. Not because I was busy. Because I needed to understand what it did to me. I washed my plate slowly. Dried it. Put it back in the cabinet. I noticed how calm my hands were. That felt important. A year ago, a message like that would have sent me spiraling. I would have rewritten responses in my head until nothing felt right. Now, I just waited. The next morning, there was another message. If stories like this resonate with you, subscribe to our channel to hear more deep and powerful real-life dramas. Your mom would really like to hear from you. No apology. No explanation. Just an expectation wrapped in softness. I read it on the bus to work, surrounded by strangers staring at their phones, each of us alone in our own private urgency. I slipped my phone back into my bag and looked out the window. The city moved the way it always did. Unconcerned. Indifferent. At work, I answered calls. Scheduled rooms. Smiled at people who needed help and people who didn't say thank you. I did my job well. That steadiness carried me through the day like muscle memory. It wasn't until I got home that the weight settled in. I sat on my couch, shoes still on, coat folded beside me. The apartment was quiet in that late afternoon way that felt earned. I let the silence stretch. Then my phone rang. My mother's name lit up the screen. I didn't pick up right away. I watched it buzz. Stop. Buzz again. On the third ring, I answered. "Hi," I said. Her voice sounded careful. Polite. Like we were acquaintances who shared a past but not a present. "Emily," she said. "Hi. We didn't know if you'd answer." I didn't respond to that. She filled the space quickly. She always did. "We've just been talking," she said. "About everything. About how things are these days." I leaned back against the couch, eyes on the ceiling. "And?" I asked. A pause. "Well," she said, "things are complicated right now." That word again. Complicated. She didn't explain. She didn't have to. I could hear it in her voice. The tightness. The careful tone people use when they want something but don't want to say it yet. My father took the phone. "Hey," he said. His voice was neutral. Controlled. Like this was a business call. "We were hoping we could talk to you about something." I waited. There it was. They had sold the house. Quickly. Not for what they expected. My brother had made some investments that didn't work out. My sister was going through a divorce. Temporary, they said. Everything was temporary. They needed time. They needed space. They needed help. "We were just thinking," my father said, choosing each word carefully, "that you might not be opposed to us staying with you for a while." With you. Not asking. Not if. Just, placing it gently in my lap like something I should hold. "It wouldn't be long," my mother added quickly, "back on the line. Just until we get back on our feet." Back. On our feet. I looked around my apartment. The couch I had bought myself. The plant on the windowsill, reaching stubbornly toward the light. The quiet I had learned to live inside. "How long?" I asked. Another pause. "We don't know," she said. "But family helps family, right?" There it was. The sentence that used to own me. I didn't answer right away. In that silence, memories pressed in. My mother sighing at dinner. My sister smiling when I failed. My brother's certainty that I would come back. "You'll be back in a month." I imagined them in my space. My routines bending around their expectations. Their comments. Their concern disguised as advice. I imagined waking up smaller again. "We wouldn't get in your way," my mother said quickly. "We're not like that." I almost laughed. Almost. "I need time to think," I said. There was a shift on the other end of the line. Time was not what they expected. "Of course," my father said. "We just assumed." "I know," I said. "I'll call you back." I ended the call before he could finish. My hands were still calm. That night, I didn't sleep much. Not from panic. From clarity. I replayed the years I had spent shrinking so others could feel comfortable. The way help had always come with conditions. With reminders. With jokes that stayed too long. I also remembered the good things. My mother braiding my hair when I was little. My father teaching me how to ride a bike. Family dinners before everything became measured. None of it fit neatly. In the morning, I made coffee and sat by the window. I watched people walk below me, carrying bags, carrying worries, carrying lives I would never know. I asked myself questions I had never been allowed to ask before. Was I cruel if I said no? Was I weak if I said yes? Did love require access? I thought about what it had taken to build this life. The nights I cried silently. The hunger. The fear. The stubbornness that kept me here when it would have been easier to go back. No one had saved me. I had done this. My phone buzzed again. A message from my sister this time. "We heard you're doing well. We're proud of you." I stared at it. Proud. The word felt heavy. Late. Another message followed. "Mom said you might help us out. Just for a bit." I set the phone down. I stood up and walked through my apartment slowly. Touching the wall. The table. The door that locked from the inside. I imagined opening that door. I imagined not opening it. Both futures felt real. That afternoon, I typed a response. Deleted it. Typed another. Deleted that too. There was no perfect answer. No choice that didn't cost something. As evening fell, I sat on the couch, phone in my hands, the city glowing softly outside my window. I thought about who I had been when they laughed. I thought about who I was now. And I asked myself the only question that mattered. If I open the door, do I lose the life I fought to build? Or do I lose myself if I don't? I haven't replied yet. The phone is still in my hands. And I'm still deciding. So tell me. What would you do in my place?